Okay, shalom. So in the previous shiur, which as we said was a little shortened, I'm just going to repeat in points what we discussed then. I don't want to go through all the material, and I will have the same source of sources, the same, I will share the screen soon for that, for those sources, but I don't want to go through the whole thing, just to give us background. The issue we are discussing is the question of equality, one of the main values in today's world, and of equality between all people. And does the Torah accept that, or is the Torah, sometimes people feel that the Torah doesn't do that and it's not right. So how do we deal with this as one of our challenges? And we discussed, first of all, that people are, first of all, different. We want people to have equal opportunity and equal rights. We discussed those rights, and by the way, there was a little discussion about the American Declaration of Independence and the International Declaration of Human Rights. And I checked, and it seems from the wording that there's clearly some connection between them. But you can all check that out, and and have your own opinions about it. But in any case, people are different, but we want them to have equal opportunities and rights and so on. And I would say the Torah stresses in many places that it is important to keep the equal rights, especially of people who are weak in society, people who are outsiders, who are strangers, people who have lost their family support and things like that. The Torah stresses that several times, and that gives me the idea that in general the Torah has this concept of seeing to it that everyone has equal rights, and it mentions sometimes the people, the outsiders, that shouldn't have a different law system, legal system, shouldn't be given different rights and so on. But on the other hand, the Torah also makes separations and differentiations between people, so we do have to discuss this. And to begin with, to start off, we brought 5 different sources that were showing, or 4 sources and then a 5th one, that were showing the idea that the world is not created complete, and it is up to us to make the world complete, and that can be scientifically and physically, but also legally and morally. So one of them was about, 2 of them were about the word la'asot at the end of the description of creation, asher bara Elohim, and it doesn't say ve'asa, Hashem did the world, but la'asot, Hashem created the world for someone else to keep on doing it, to keep on making it. And both the Midrash and the Zohar, those were the first 2 sources, pick up on that and say that the world is not complete, and it's up to us, human beings, to continue the completion of the world. The 3rd source was using the words of man being created, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, in the sense that just like God creates, so we have a certain ability to create. We have to continue creating and bringing the world to its completion. The 4th was Rav Soloveitchik, who explains that the whole idea of the story of creation and Bereshit is to show us that the world is not complete, and like Hashem, we have to be like Hashem, and we should try and make the world complete. The 5th source was a Rambam in Mishneh Torah, Maimonides, about in the laws of slavery, Hilchot Avadim, where the Torah does not prohibit slavery, does not stop slavery, and it has laws of slavery. And while the Rambam brings down the laws of slavery, at the same time, at the end of these laws, he says that is midat chasidut and darchei chokhmah, a righteous person and a person who has wisdom will create justice and will not put all his weight down upon his slave. And he speaks about the equality, the basic equality between all human beings, the master and the slave. And even though it doesn't drive the halakha, and it didn't drive the Rambam 900 years ago to the point where he would say, and therefore we should banish slavery. It doesn't say that, but it does bring him to a point of saying that it's important that within that reality of slavery, that we treat people with justice and remember the basic equality between different people. He quotes psukim from Job, saying that we were both born from the womb, so we're all created equal in that sense. And so that's an important example to show us that sometimes even the rabbis say that the halakha brings us up to a certain point, but it is right to behave even beyond the point of halakha. And sometimes generations develop and continue and progress, and then it is no longer right to leave something that the halakha did not prevent and did not forbid. It comes a time when it's right for us to say there's no longer any room for that in our world, and we should forbid it and prevent it. Then we brought the fascinating Gemara, which I'm always fascinated by it, in Bava Batra, where Rabbi Akiva and Tonosrophus are discussing whose actions are greater, those of God and those of man. And Tonosrophus is expecting that Rabbi Akiva will say that God's actions are the best, and Rabbi Akiva says no, man's actions are better. And he brings a few examples. We mentioned there the examples of bread. We have wheat or barley, and we have bread. So Hashem creates wheat, and man creates bread, which is taking wheat and improving it. And the example, of course, of circumcision, and also the example of cutting the umbilical cord. In other words, Hashem creates a world in ways that we can't control and we can't create, but he leaves things for us to continue and complete. And it's not just the way Hashem created it, leave it that way. It is up to us to continue and improve it. So those are examples. And then they bring this terrific parable in their argument where Tonosrophus says to Rabbi Akiva, if Hashem wanted people not to be poor, he wouldn't have created them, wouldn't have made them poor. So when you give tzedakah, you're going against Hashem. And he brings the parable of a king who puts one of his slaves in prison, and then someone goes and tells people not to give them food or water, and someone goes and gives them food and water. So the king is angry with them. And Rabbi Akiva answers him that if the king puts his son in prison, he's angry with his son, he puts him in prison and tells everyone not to give him food and water, and someone goes and gives him food and water, he finds that the king is thankful to him. The king appreciates what he does and will give him a prize. And so what Rabbi Akiva is saying is that we are not only slaves of Hashem, we are also sons of Hashem. We have to take Hashem's Torah and carry it out in the right way in our lives. We have to become partners with Hashem in the Torah. And so the Torah, this Gemara is telling us, this parable of Rabbi Akiva is telling us a fascinating thing. Sometimes the Torah says A, and it is our mission to say, but wait, shouldn't in this day and age, shouldn't we do something different? And I would take an example of like Avraham arguing with Hashem about Sodom and other examples. And I would reject, and I said this the last time, a month ago, 4 weeks ago, I would reject two extremes. One extreme is the one that says it's not permissible to raise the question. If this is what the Torah says, don't ask questions, be a slave and carry out what the master says. And the other extreme is that says, well, if the modern world says something, we have to comply with that. We have to how do you say lehatim? We have to adjust the Torah to be in correlation or to be appropriate for today's world. And that is not always true. Sometimes the world is making mistakes and bringing us down and moving us, rolling us downhill. And the Torah has to be the one that balances that and creates opposite energies and stops that. So it is, if you take the rejection of these two extremes, it's right to raise the question, and then we will discuss this question and look at it through the lens of Torah, within the Torah criteria, and the proper authorities will make decisions about it. And some things we will accept and say, yes, today this is the right thing to do, and some things we will reject. And one of the criteria, I believe, for discussing these kinds of issues is the basic question of what is the Torah's attitude? And therefore, the first examples and the idea, what I opened up with, that the Torah wants us to make sure that people, the weak elements in society, get equal opportunities and equal rights, shows us that the Torah cares about this. And where the Torah is different, it opens room for discussing it. Should it be different today? And it needs the proper authorities to make the decisions. But raising the question is not saying something which is opposite of the Torah. It's saying, how do we find the balance in our days between two values of the Torah? On the one hand, the Torah fights for and stresses equality. On the other hand, sometimes the Torah itself creates lack of equality. So how do we put together what is the right, I always forget this word. What is the right? Oh, the word in Hebrew is nuscha.
Compromise?
Version, balance.
Formula.
That's the word I always forget.
There we go.
What's the right formula for putting the two values together? And I will give a different example. For instance, I think that equality, freedom, the way people respect one another, these are things that we find the value in the Torah, and sometimes we need to balance it differently in our times. But for instance, the freedom that creates, again, I'm not sure about the pronunciation in English, promiscuity, am I saying that properly? There's just lack of boundaries and everything is permitted. The Torah, I don't think there's anywhere in the Torah where we see support for that kind of thing, and that's something that I would reject and say that we have to ask ourselves how to explain it, how to bring that light to the world, and not necessarily to fight violently about this, but forcefully about this, but certainly that we don't accept what's happening in the world around us, and we want the Torah to be able to balance that thing, and therefore. We see that there are two different kinds of situations, and which is our situation. And in order to discuss this, I'd like to bring a few examples. And this is what we started doing at the end of the previous shiur, when the computer did not enable us to continue. So here we are sharing these sources. And we have this source, number 7, in Sefer Vayikra, where the Torah says right here at the top of these sources today, where the Torah says that the Kohanim, we started discussing this last time, a Kohen who has a mum, who has a physical impairment or blemish or a disability and so on, should not work in the Mikdash. The Torah says, Lo yikrav le'akriv. He should not bring the sacrifices of Bnei Israel. This is one of the roles of the Kohanim in the Mikdash. And a Kohen who has a mum should not do this. Today, this would be very difficult to accept, that a person, because he has a physical disability, should not be able to perform this responsibility of the Kohanim. I'd like to mention that the Torah itself says, and it's based on a pasuk, and here look at source 9. I'm skipping to 9, and then we'll go back to 8 and then to 10. Source 9 here says that he doesn't do the work, but he shares the korbanot. In other words, he has the right, it's explicit in the pasuk in the Torah, as you see at the end of source 9, Lechem Elohav mikodesh kodashim u'min kodashim yochel. He shares in eating the korbanot with the Kohanim, even though he doesn't share in bringing and sacrificing the korbanot to the Mikdash. So it's kind of an intricate situation. He is limited in his participation with the Kohanim, but he does have a certain element which he does share with the Kohanim. So why is this, and what does this mean? So the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, source number 8, in Guide of the Perplexed, the Rambam, as I said in the previous show, I'm not going to read all these sources in Hebrew, but we have them here, so each one of you, as strong as your Hebrew is, you can read them while we're speaking, while we're discussing them, and then we can discuss them, but I'll just explain them shortly in English. So the Rambam says that there are a lot of things we do in the Mikdash to add respect, to add honor. It should be exalted. The Mikdash should be something that we look up to, that we consider as something very high, very holy. And so, for instance, we have guards. There are Kohanim who guard the Mikdash. No, these are not armed guards. This is not army or police protecting the Mikdash. These are people who are protecting the Mikdash for its holiness. These are, even just having guards, even if they don't do anything, it's just like giving it special, something very, very showing how important it is to us. And one of these things, says the Rambam, is that a Kohen who has a mum should not work in the Mikdash because the people will not respect the Mikdash. They will only respect the Mikdash, the masses. The Rambam uses the word hahamon. I'll just show you where this is written. The Rambam says, Eina adam mechubad etzel hahamon. Amongst the masses, a person is not respected by his surato ha'amitit, by how the true value of this person's spirituality, the real personality of this person, ela b'shlemut evarav v'yofi b'gadav. He has to be a good-looking, perfect-looking person wearing beautiful clothing. Like we all know that the Kohanim have special, beautiful clothing. And for the same reason, he has to be a person who looks nice. So if he has a certain blemish, impairment, and so on, the masses will not respect the Mikdash if the Kohanim don't have this kind of beauty. And then he goes on to differentiate, in the next paragraph over here, Rambam goes on to differentiate between one second, just move this down a bit. The Rambam goes on to differentiate between a Levi and a Kohen. The Levi doesn't have the same importance as a Kohen. So if the Leviim have a mum, they can still be Leviim in the Mikdash. And for instance, if they were playing music or singers amongst those were some of the roles of the Leviim in the Mikdash. The only thing that would make them not be appropriate for that mission is, for instance, if they can't sing properly. If the guy sings off key, he can't be a Levi who's singing in the Mikdash. If this person can't, let's say he has an impairment and he has one hand and he can't play music properly in the Mikdash. What about those people that you see sometimes on YouTube who, they don't have hands and they play piano with their toes and they play beautifully? So that person, theoretically, could be a Levi in the Mikdash if he could use his body somehow to play music, even though he has this impairment. Still, he could be a Levi in the Mikdash because it doesn't stop him from being able to perform his role. So it's very interesting that the Rambam says the Leviim, the only thing that would stop them from performing the role in the Mikdash is if they physically cannot perform it. But if they have an impairment and they can still perform that role, go ahead. Whereas the Kohanim, even if he has a small impairment and he can bring the sacrifices physically, he's totally, mentally, he's totally capable of bringing the korbanot. But the masses would not respect the Mikdash if the Kohanim aren't perfect-looking people. Therefore, we have to draw a line here and say the Kohanim who have a mum, an impairment, are not allowed to perform the work of bringing the sacrifices. They can eat the sacrifices, but they can't bring the sacrifice. Now, I would say it's not difficult for me to accept what the Rambam is saying if he's right. Meaning, if people would not respect the Mikdash because the Kohanim had an impairment, a mum, so I understand you have to make a hierarchy of values. You have to say this comes before that. It's more, even though it creates a certain aspect of unfairness and inequality between these people. Well, actually, it's the inequality, the lack of equality is there to begin with because it's only Kohanim, and they won't allow me to be one of the people bringing the sacrifices. But even within the Kohanim, it creates a lack of equality. But the importance of the Mikdash and the masses having respect and considering holding the Mikdash to be a very high, exalted place is more important. But what do we do today? This is the question we had time to ask and did not have time to discuss. So here we're catching up with where we were in the last shiur. What do we do today? Today, the masses are going to say this is wrong. The masses are going to respect the Mikdash more if we say that 10% of the Kohanim have to be people with disabilities, and we're going to find ways for them to be able to perform the Avodah in the Mikdash. And if a shul, if a Beit Knesset today takes out a row or two of seats to make a ramp that will enable people in a wheelchair to go up to the bima where they read the Torah and be able to have an aliyah, that shul will not lose its respect in the eyes of the masses. That shul will grow in its respect in the eyes of the masses, because we're being more inclusive and enabling more people to be participant and so on. And if two politicians are competing for a position, and one of them prides himself in not allowing any imperfect people to be part of his staff, and one makes sure that a certain percentage of his staff are people with different disabilities, but we're creating equality for all, you know which is going to strengthen and which is going to weaken their votes. So what would we say today? If this is what the Rambam is saying, what would we say today? So this is a question people ask today, and young students ask today, young students such as all those present here today. So anyone want to relate to that? Say something about that before we continue? Bakasha.
Yeah. It may have something to do with things that you don't bring to the king, things that you don't do in front of a king. And maybe this is
what Tova is talking about. It's in the sources there. I will show you right away. Here we are. Okay. Absolutely. What you're
there
saying.
we go.
Based.
Lo Baal Mum says you don't bring right. That's what it is.
I'll show you the source. Here it is. You see this source 11, okay? Source 11 is Rashi on that pasuk in the Torah that says that a person with an impairment and with a mum cannot participate, the Kohen cannot participate in the work in the Mikdash. And the Rambam says, Rashi compares it to a pasuk in Malachi, and the prophet Malachi. Malachi is the last one of the prophets. After you have Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, and Yechezkel, we have the 12 small prophets, small in quantity. And the last three of them are Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, and Malachi is the last one. And in Malachi, he says he is critical. He criticizes the Kohanim who were working in the Mikdash and were doing it in ways that were not proper. And one of them, he says, is that people brought sacrifices that are not good and are not worthy, but they would allow people to bribe them, and they would bring these unworthy sacrifices. And he brings the words. You see these last three words over here from Malachi. Hakriveu na lefechatecha. Pecha is a word which is actually Persian. And Malachi is already in the time of the at least after Babylon coming to the empire, and he uses the word pecha, which is the word they used for a person who was the local ruler. Like if the king was in Persia and he was an emperor, and he created an empire, and he ruled all kinds of other places. So the ruler of Eretz Yisrael was called a pecha. So pecha is a ruler, and he says, would you bring a gift to your ruler? You have to come once a year or whatever it is to the ruler and bring a report and bring taxes and all kinds of things like that. And you bring him a gift. Would you bring him a broken gift? You brought him a beautiful vase and it broke on the way. You're going to be afraid to walk in. You're going to have to find something else. You can't bring him a broken gift. So in the same way, in Hashem's Mikdash, says Rashi, you can't have people who are broken physically. They can't be the ones working there, not because there's something wrong with these people, but because it's not proper to bring that these people should be the ones that we send as our representatives in front of the ruler, in front of the king. So that here you see the idea that Tova is saying. Again, I'm continuing open for discussion. Go ahead, Mark.
Are the imperfections that are being discussed strictly physical and not emotional or mental?
Both.
Also a great point. We will get to that question maybe later today, maybe next time. But right now, what the Torah was discussing is physical, and in the halakha, you can find in the halachic sources, you can find the list of these impairments, and they are all physical. Some of them are significant, and some of them are very minor, and yet the rule is the same for all of them. And the list, the halachic list, is physical. We'll get to the question. I'll already give you a heads up on what this question will be. Should we compare? We don't have Beit HaMikdash today. Should we take this halacha to where we have religious service today? Where do we have religious service today?
Sure.
In what we call Mikdash Me'at, like a little bit of the Mikdash in our Beit Knesset, in Shul. Should we say, for instance, that a person who has a disability should not be, for instance, how about a Kohen in Shul? A Kohen who has a physical impairment, a disability, a Shalech Tzibur, the person leading the tefillah. So it's one thing if he can't say the tefillah properly, but what if he's in a wheelchair? And can he be the leader of Tfilat Amidah? And so we will get to these questions later on, to the discussion of reality. So, but in the Mikdash, the rules are about physical impairments. Michael.
So it sounds like I was going to ask the question, who gets to decide how bad the impairment is? But what I'm hearing is that it's black and white, either.
Well, nothing is totally black and white, but most of it is black and white. I'm sure there will be gray areas, but they're pretty small. Most of it is a clear list, yes.
So what Mark talked about occurred to me as well. And I guess we have to decide in today's world what's important to us, but also how does it look to others? So much of the problems we have in the Jewish world today is the interpretation of the outside world. And at a time when we're trying to teach our children, for example, don't worry so much about what somebody's like on the outside. What's important is their character. And you do have the people, as you alleged or alluded to, that say, no, we have to have an exact demographic percentage of what the population looks like, or otherwise you're, not being fair to everybody, which has always seemed stupid to me.
And it's clear that we want everyone to be represented in the Mikdash, to be connected to the Mikdash.
Yes.
And maybe once we said that with Machatzit Shekel, that every person was donated and everyone had a share, so to speak, in the stock, not really, but in the Mikdash. And so there was part of the Mikdash that's built by everyone, so everyone can feel, I have a share here. But you're saying that today, in order to have that feeling, to be represented. If we wanted to bring a picture, one of the places that I work, we wanted to discuss, we had a Shabbat about allowing for all, we want the religious education in Israel to have, not to have homogeneous educators, but to have heterogeneous educators, all religious educators, but of different hashkafot olam, of different perspectives, different opinions, so that you find the avenue for every child. And if they're all, one hashkafa, so some kids will connect to them and some won't. So we put a picture on our ad for that Shabbat, and so we put men, women, and someone said this: you have to put an Ethiopian in. You can't do this with everyone's white. So, thank you for making that point. You have to have. You want people to look at the ad and say, "Oh, very nice. That's me. That's my connection here." You want everyone to be represented.
It's true, and yet, is it not possible for an Ethiopian to learn from you, or for you to learn from an Ethiopian? It's just, you put those kind of limits on people, and just that fact is offensive. I mean, I don't want to be represented by Mr. Perfect Kohen, who I know cheats people in his business every day.
But he looks very much like you.
Ah.
Not to say that you cheat in your business, to say that he's represented by somebody that has your looks, but is that really what represents me? Okay.
Exactly.
or it's character, but if it's character that represents me, so why should, it'll be very difficult. I agree, it'll be very difficult for the world today. Let's say Mikdash is built soon, to accept that this is what will happen in the Mikdash. So on the one hand, the difficulty is, I can compare this to something else, but first of all, the difficulty, it's very hard to see the Mikdash having this rule today. On the other hand, this is not a rabbinic decree, this is not a minhag, this is an explicit pasuk in the Torah. So do we have the power and the authority to make a decision about this? I would say certainly Sanhedrin would have the authority to make a decision, at least to say, as what we call a hora'at sha'ah, that if we build the Mikdash today, and we say, and we act by this rule, then what's going to happen is that we're going to drive people away from the Mikdash. So therefore, we're going to make a hora'at sha'ah, temporary rule. We can't go on a regular, an eternal halacha decision that forever we're going to go against what it says in the Torah, but we can say that for now we're going to make a temporary decision, and the temporary decision might stay around for 100 years or 1,000 years. I don't know what's going to happen a few hundred years ahead, and maybe attitudes will change, and maybe we'll understand something that we didn't understand today. But right now, it's very difficult to see the Mikdash being built and for that happening. But the ones who will have to make that decision will be people who have the proper halachic authority. I can say, as I always like to say about Sanhedrin, I do not think that I can be a candidate for Sanhedrin, but I would try, if Sanhedrin were put together today, I would try to be what is today like an assistant to a member of Knesset, or an aide, or an advisor to a Chaver Knesset. I would try to be an advisor for one of the rabbis that I think would be worthy of being in Sanhedrin, and I would suggest this to him, and maybe he doesn't need me to suggest it to him, maybe he thought of it already, but I would support it, but it's not up to me to make that decision. Right now, we don't have the Mikdash, so I don't have to make that decision, but I do think it's an option, and it's possible. And by the way, I would say the same about, this is even more far-reaching, I would say the same about the sacrifices themselves, that, today, in today's world, to build the Mikdash and have sacrifices, it's not only me personally who has difficulty with that, it would make the Mikdash very ostracized, ridiculed. It would not enable the Mikdash in today's society to bring light to the world. And I think we have to make our list of, we have to prioritize things. And in that sense, and I think we have to also be modest and say, but I don't know forever. Maybe 50 years, 100 years, 300 years ahead, maybe we'll understand something that we don't understand today and be able to reenact something that we stopped for a certain period of time. Ilana, go ahead.
I was just thinking, are we distinguishing between a genuine mum, something from mileda, from birth, versus, somebody breaks their arm or breaks a leg?
Well, there's a difference between breaking and between a person has a limb amputated in an accident, So temporary, if I remember correctly, I would have to check the halacha. I'm not sure I remember, which is one of the reasons why they're not going to let me into the Sanhedrin. Maybe they'll.
This is why I'm asking. I have no idea.
I think that if I remember correctly, the temporary is temporarily not allowed to, but then can go back once he heals. He can, and a mum that was caused, they was not born with it, but happened at some point in life. From that point on, makes him unable to participate. Right. I think I'm not 100% sure.
That's true.
So then the question is, do you need a really good plastic surgeon to help all these Kohanim?
There you go.
And here you have another solution, modern solution for the problem, which is a very interesting question. In the beginning of modern science on Down syndrome, one of the things they did was to have plastic surgery on the facial The Down syndrome is very noticeable in the facial features of people with Down syndrome. And to make them more accepted in society, there was a stage, I read this in a book of Professor Feuerstein, I don't know if all of you know the name. Professor Feuerstein is an Israeli-American and then Israeli professor who passed away, but I knew him a little bit. Actually, my mother worked with him decades ago when we made Aliyah. One of the amazing things that he did in his life was he showed that Down syndrome and other mental disabilities are not set, that maybe they can't reach, the same equal mental abilities that people that were born without this can, but they can actually move forward. Their abilities can improve. And if you care and give them help and support, there are different levels of Down syndrome and so on, but some of them can reach amazing levels of ability. And it's fascinating. His son is Harav Rafi Feuerstein, who was one of the heads of Rabbanei Tzohar, and also took over the Feuerstein Institution about this issue of the Down syndrome and so on. He's made an impact, a universal impact on how people with Down syndrome and mental disabilities are treated. And his son wrote a book about his father after he passed away, and I have the book at home, and I started reading it, but I haven't continued. One of the things I learned from that book is that there was a stage where they would make plastic surgery to make the people more acceptable in society. And one of the things Professor Feuerstein succeeded in doing was showing the world that leave the physical features, these people can still be accepted in society, and you can believe that they can move forward mentally and so on, which is fascinating. But you're suggesting, Michael, a fascinating idea that I didn't think of, that maybe modern plastic surgery, it's only a physical impairment.
So
Maybe we can fix it, and we can even, print up a new arm and plant that, and then this person can work in the Mikdash. But what are our values? Do we want that to be the solution, or do we want acceptance by society to be the solution? It's a great question, and it's a great suggestion.
Speaking of acceptance from society, with regard to the Down syndrome kids, there's a magazine or something, an organization, I think even, that has been using Down syndrome little girls, especially girls, as models.
Yeah, I saw that.
I can't remember where I saw it, but I saw an article about it.
Right.
That's nice.
Because some of them are just beautiful in a way that's maybe not conventional, but they're heavenly beautiful. And they're helping change the image and the bias.
Yes,
that's
nice.
But once again, this can challenge what the pasuk in the Torah is saying, and we have to ask ourselves this question. So I'd like to show you another source. I'm going back to the sources. The one that we skipped, source number 10, is long and it'll be difficult to read, but I'll give you a little shortened summary of it. This is from one of the Hasidic masters, the Tzemach Tzedek, and he says that he also notices this difference in halacha, that the Kohen is not permitted to perform these bringing of the sacrifices in the Mikdash, but he's allowed to eat the sacrifices with the other Kohanim. And he says the following. He says that in the Mikdash, there is a physical revelation of Hashem. Hashem is revealed in a way that everyone can see. And therefore, everything has to be perfect. And we can connect different things here because, the king is here. So everyone has to be respecting the king in their external appearance and so on. So everything externally has to be perfect here because there is a physical expression of revelation of God here. Whereas eating is, what is eating? Eating is, we do it every morning and every evening. We eat every day of our lives. What is eating? It's not holy. The holiness in eating is spiritual, is an intrinsic. If you eat in holiness, if you eat in a positive, proper, holy way, that's something that we don't see externally. It has to do with your soul, with your inner personality, intrinsic personality. So therefore, he says, performing the sacrifices, it clashes with the revelation of God in the Mikdash, whereas eating the sacrifice is in more internal spiritual act, and therefore this Kohen is not restricted spiritually. He's no less of a spiritual person than anyone else, and for that he can perform. Now, I'd like to use this long piece by the Tzemach Tzedek to say that that it's just a thought that maybe, I don't know what it means that God has a physical revelation in the Mikdash, and it makes me a little uncomfortable. I even like to think that, the real idea of Beit HaMikdash is for me to enable my spiritual ability to see spiritually, my spiritual strength of my spiritual insightfulness. That should be the strength of what I get in the Mikdash, and not something of physical revelation. But in any case, the thought that maybe one day I will understand that there's something about the Mikdash that clashes with a physical disability of the Kohen, and therefore I would understand why it's not acceptable, like I would understand that you can't allow a person where the physical disability is relevant, so I can't have him do that, not because I'm being unfair to him, because he can't perform that physical action. You can't allow a person who can't control the car to drive. So you can't allow this person to work in the Mikdash, because I would understand where it's going to cause damage. But maybe now I don't see that, and one day in the future I can see that. I'm leaving that option open as well. But I would also say that right now it would be detrimental to Beit HaMikdash, to the ability of Beit HaMikdash to bring light to the world, if the Sanhedrin would not make a decision that people with impairments, temporarily, Kohanim with impairments, can perform part of the work in the Mikdash. Again, I'm going to stop. Go ahead. Please go ahead.
So something else just occurred. There certainly are professions where there's a job description that involves physical appearance, physical ability. One that just occurred to me is, you may have heard of the Rockettes, a very famous dance group in New York City. And they have a kind of a chorus line, and every girl that is accepted into this group has to be almost exactly the same height, same appearance. They have to be able to kick at exactly the same angle,
Right.
or it's just not going to look right and it's not acceptable. It may well be that going to the Beis HaMikdash, part of the job description is for all these guys to look so similar that it just blends in. They're part of the scenery. You're there for the spirituality. You're going to be disturbed if somebody stands out, and that's maybe one reason.
Also,
Very interesting. Let me just react, please, to what Michael is saying, that one of the issues of Kohanim in Shul, a Kohen with a mum, is that it's going to distract us, the Israelites, from our concentration in Birkat Kohanim.
Right.
So we will discuss, you're bringing up all the right points today, and we will discuss Shul and Baal Tfilah and Kohanim, and all of this is going to come up. We're not going to get it all done today, but it is all going to come up. So it's interesting to bring that idea to Beit HaMikdash as well. But I would raise the same question. Can we get so used to people being different from one another that if I see a Kohen with an impairment, it won't distract me, and the same will happen in the Mikdash? Is that good, or is that a good thing to happen, or maybe not? Just opening the question.
And of course, what about that Baal Tfilah who sings flat? Who sings flat?
Yeah, of course.
That distracts me terribly.
That's relevant. That's relevant. You know the old saying. When
you guys know what I'm talking about.
A person becomes an Avel, and therefore he's the Baal Tfilah. And then someone says to him, your father, when he passed away, he made you an orphan. He didn't make you a singer,
Good line. But you all know what I'm talking about.
Okay, Mark, bevakasha.
I like the idea of a person who can't who has a disability that makes it difficult for them to drive. We can't let them drive because, they might not be able to drive properly. Okay, but what do we actually do with such a person? Or what does that person want to do? If a person, for example, is born with 2 legs, that one leg is much shorter than the other. I have a cousin like that. What do we do? Do we say you can't drive? Or do we say we will outfit the car and we will try to help you so that you can drive? We will actually work on integrating you and whatever we all have disabilities, right? We all have disabilities. Does that mean we shouldn't participate? No, it means that, I think to some extent, it means that we try to find ways to overcome our disabilities so that we can participate.
So first of all, I totally agree with you. And in spite of agreeing with you, I will mention a second side of the opposite side of the flip side of the coin. That is that also has a limit. There are certain things where where the person that we can set up the car for him, but there might be something else that we can't set up for him. If it's we can make we can have a Paralympics, right? But they're not going to be able to compete in the regular Olympics. Maybe Olympics is not important. Maybe driving is less important than Beit HaMikdash, So not everything, I'm not thinking of a good enough example right now, but not everything can work out that way. So there's a limit to that as well. So we have to try our best to be inclusive, but understand that there are places where it's relevant and the limitation will remain.
About doing something for humanly, for helping somebody with an impairment is one thing, but when you're going to the Beis HaMikdash, it's for a spiritual something. And sometimes in a recipe, you can have this kind of flour or this kind of flour, but you can't, if this is what is needed to get to this point, that's the kind of flour you need, and it doesn't matter how you feel sorry for them or anything.
Right. Right. So if I feel bad for the company that manufactures the other kind of flour, doesn't mean I can use it for this cake.
Right.
I can't always just be considerate of everyone, because then I lose all frameworks of things. I agree.
Get to that spiritual level, you need that flour, that particular, nothing wrong with it flour.
So we have to look for, what we have to look for is to try and maximize these 2 different values. And as I said before, find the formula for putting them together, because one value is being inclusive and considerate as much as possible of everyone, and another value is maintaining frameworks. Here I'll raise another very controversial and sensitive issue, which is transgenders. In general, controversial and sensitive, and specifically a man who trans to woman and now wants to compete in women's sports, but his muscular or her muscular build is stronger. And, on the one hand, I want to be inclusive. On the other hand, is that fair?
Right.
To other women. So I'm not even making decisions now. I'm just raising a question to say that these are questions. And so I think for us to look into these questions for Torah, to be able to look at these values and maintain, thank you. The discussion today is I've given this shiur in the past, but this is, I must say to you, this is the best it's ever been, because you're raising points that are helping me think through these issues and see the intricacy of how intricate this actually is. And I don't want the world to be a world without frameworks, just like in school. I want to be considerate of children, of students who are, less achievers, are not the best achievers, but when, like you say, that's fine on one level, but the doctor who goes to medical school, I don't want him to be a person who I compromised and accepted someone who's not going to be, at the end of the day, is not going to be a good doctor because I wanted to be inclusive, or
affirmative action.
No, another role, like the person who plans an airplane, builds the airplane. I don't want to fly on the airplane that was built by someone who, they let him into the school that taught how to build airplanes, even though he wasn't really so capable, but they were being really considerate of someone, and then I'm flying on that airplane. No, thank you. So, so I agree. We want both values. How do we find it's very intricate to find the right combination of the different values.
I was afraid you were going to go a transgender Kohen that wants to work in the temple. And how do we define a mum? And that's tricky.
Listen, the rabbis are being asked questions on which side of the mechitza should the transgender sit, and
it's not funny.
After he became she, it's not funny at all. It's very challenging. After he trans to she, and when we,
which bathroom does he use?
So we don't need a mechitza, Tzvi.
Okay, listen.
No, we need a mechitza.
We need a mechitza anyway.
Okay, Ilana.
Very confused.
Oh, Ilana.
Doesn't work when you didn't want a mechitza to begin with, so sorry.
Can I ask Mark a question? Mark, did you have long hair? Mark, can you hear me?
That was a different. No, that was a different Mark. That was, I don't know if it's a disability or not, but that was a different Mark.
Which one is a disability, the long hair or the short hair?
Just asking.
Mark, she can't recognize you. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I know. I looked for a while and I said to myself, the same guy, but maybe.
Well, the hair is just as white.
His personality
but
is
it's short. Look how short it is. It looks good.
But, a lot of what we've discussed this evening also is what is the impression given to the people watching the Kohanim or the people participating?
Right.
I think there's been a lot less discussion about what impact it has on a person who is excluded because of their disability.
Absolutely. So, and again, I can't overlook either of those two values. And I don't want a mikdash that excludes people and disregards what it does to them. But I do want a mikdash that functions properly. And I don't want, as I said about the person who builds airplanes and about the doctor, this is true also about the mikdash. I don't want the Kohen Gadol to be someone who's not worthy just because I'm being inclusive. So again, these are two values.
Right.
Things in the world have to run, in some things it's very important how they function, that they function well, and they carry out their mission, and nothing happens to damage their mission because their mission is very important. And on the other hand, I don't want to be exclusive and I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and I have to find the complicated, intricate combination of these different values. This is the beauty of what I've learned today.
So some of us, we choose careers, right? At some point in our lives, we choose careers. And what do we choose? Do we choose, something that's sort of beyond our abilities, or do we choose something that, is something that we really like? What I'm trying to express here is that when the ideal world is everybody is created equal more or less, and everybody can do everything, but we know that that's not the case. It's just
Right.
It just doesn't happen biologically or phenomenologically. It just doesn't happen. So what's the solution to that? The solution must be something along the lines of, okay, you're counseling a person, they want to be a doctor or an astronaut or something, but they just don't have, they're not going to build an airplane. Okay, so you find for this person the best that they can be with the abilities that they have. And being able to tailor this in some way, flexible, of course, in some way, that I think it has very little to do perhaps with the discussion of Kohanim, but it's a way of people not having equal opportunity, but also doing what they can, that they can be the best contributors to society.
Meaning that the equal opportunity doesn't mean that everyone has to have the same opportunity to reach the same goals or the same positions, but everyone has to be given the equal opportunity to reach his place and his contribution and his best achievement.
The maximum that person can do.
Right. That's a very important distinction, and it's very, in some places we can say, let's find for this person a role within this institution or this group or this mission, even though there's no way he's going to end up being the leader of it, but he can have a place. Is that what we want to do for him, or do we want to enable him to be a leader of something maybe of lesser importance, but he will feel better about? These are all considerations. We have to look into all these issues. Absolutely. So really, I really, this has been very helpful and insightful for me. Very much helping me move forward in this and thinking about this discussion. So I'm glad that I asked questions, even though it's not the first time I'm asking them. It's great to see that. And Halevai, as long as I live, I can be able to think about these things and have friends who help me make progress on these issues, thinking through issues in life.
Motto.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The shiurim are very stimulating as always. For all
If
of
we
us.
have
Thank
the
you.
Hebrew language shiur in a week, then the next time it will be in 2 weeks. If because of Yom HaZikaron leading up to Yom HaAtzmaut, we won't have the shiur next week, then we'll have the Hebrew one in 2 weeks, and our next one will be in 3 weeks, 8:30 p.m.
So no class next week.
I'm not
Wait
sure
a
yet.
minute.
I'm not sure yet. I haven't.
Oh, you let us know.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
Good to
very
see
much.
everybody.
Be well,
Good night.